You think Cersei and Jaime were twisted? You think the Red Wedding was brutal? You think Joffrey was the most evil royal who ever lived? Well, what I discovered about real palace betrayals will make you realize that Game of Thrones is actually a children's bedtime story. I'm talking about a pope's son who murdered his own brother out of pure jealousy, then used his father's position to cover up the crime while he took over the family empire. An emperor who eliminated his own mother after she made him the most powerful man on earth. And a Tsar who was so consumed with paranoid rage that he struck down his own heir with his iron staff, destroying his entire bloodline in a single moment of fury. And here's what will absolutely blow your mind. These aren't myths or legends or fictional characters dreamed up by some twisted writer. These are documented historical facts with eyewitness accounts, court records, official documents, and written confessions. Real people, real blood, real betrayals that make Westeros look like a Disney movie. Can you imagine living in a world where your own brother would murder you for political gain? Where your son, the person you gave life to, would orchestrate your death the moment you became inconvenient? Where family loyalty meant absolutely nothing when power was on the line? These three cases completely destroyed my understanding of how evil humans can actually become. Because when you have unlimited power and zero consequences, apparently there's no bond sacred enough to stop you from committing the ultimate betrayal. Not brotherhood, not parenthood, not even the woman who literally gave you life. The Borgias made the Lannisters look like a loving family. Ivan the Terrible made Tywin Lannister look like a gentle grandfather. And Nero. Nero made Joffrey Baratheon look like a choir boy having a bad day. What's absolutely insane is that while George R.R. Martin had to tone down his violence for television audiences, these real historical figures had no limits whatsoever. No HBO censors, no concern for public opinion, just pure unlimited power and the complete absence of human decency. If you think Game of Thrones was intense, wait until you hear what real royals did to each other when nobody was watching. Please subscribe to the channel because real history makes fiction look like a children's fairy tale, and what I'm about to tell you will change how you see power forever. You'll discover how a man can look his brother in the eyes, knowing he's planning to kill him. You'll learn what it sounds like when a father realizes he just murdered his only heir. And you'll understand why the most dangerous person in your life might be the one who claims to love you most. But I have to warn you, once you know these stories, you'll never watch Game of Thrones the same way again. Because you'll know that somewhere in history, these betrayals actually happened to real people with real families who trusted the wrong person at the wrong time. So are you ready to discover what real evil looks like? Let me paint you a picture of the most corrupt family in Renaissance history. The year is 1497, and Rome is controlled by Pope Alexander VI, a man who openly had multiple mistresses and used the papal treasury like his personal piggy bank. But here's where it gets absolutely wild. This pope had legitimate sons who he was grooming to take over Europe through murder, manipulation, and political scheming. Giovanni Borgia was everything a Renaissance prince should be: handsome, charming, militarily successful, and absolutely beloved by the people of Rome. He was the Duke of Gandia, commanded papal armies, and was clearly his father's favorite son. Imagine him as the Robb Stark of the Borgia family, noble, respected, destined for greatness. Then there was Cesare, brilliant, ruthless, and absolutely consumed with jealousy over his brother's success. While Giovanni got military commands and duchies, Cesare was forced into the church as a cardinal. Can you imagine being one of the most ambitious men in history and being told you have to wear robes and pretend to be holy while your little brother gets everything you want? The rivalry between these brothers was legendary throughout Rome. Giovanni would return from military victories to parades and celebrations while Cesare watched from the shadows, forced to smile and bless his brother's triumphs. But here's what nobody understood at the time. Cesare wasn't just jealous. He was calculating. On June 14, 1497, both brothers attended a dinner party at their mother's house. Witnesses described them as friendly, laughing, sharing wine like loving siblings. Giovanni even helped Cesare mount his horse as they left together around midnight. The last time anyone saw Giovanni alive, he was riding through the dark Roman streets with his brother. The next morning, Giovanni's horse returned home without a rider. His servants found blood on the saddle. For 4 days, Rome searched frantically for the Pope's favorite son. The entire city was in chaos. Pope Alexander VI offered massive rewards, threatened excommunication, and even used torture to find answers. Where was Giovanni? What happened to the golden boy of the Borgia family? Then a fisherman came forward with information that would change everything. He had seen men throw something heavy into the Tiber River that night, something wrapped in cloth that sank immediately. When they dragged the river, they found Giovanni's body. 9 stab wounds, his throat cut, his purse still full of gold, proving this wasn't a robbery. Someone had murdered the Duke of Gandia for personal reasons, and they wanted to make sure he suffered. But here's the part that will absolutely destroy you. During all of this chaos and searching, there was one person who never seemed worried about Giovanni's disappearance. One person who didn't join the search parties or offer rewards or demand justice. His own brother, Cesare. And when Giovanni's body was finally discovered, guess who was conveniently out of town on church business? What happened next is so twisted that even George R.R. Martin would think twice about writing it. Because while Pope Alexander VI was publicly mourning his murdered son and demanding justice, he was privately having very different conversations with Cesare behind closed doors. Here's what the historical records show us. Within weeks of Giovanni's murder, Cesare suddenly resigned from his position as cardinal, something that was virtually unheard of in the Catholic Church. Suddenly, the brother who had been forced into religious life was free to pursue exactly what Giovanni had possessed: military command, political power, and dynastic ambitions. Coincidence? Not even close. Cesare immediately took over Giovanni's military responsibilities, his political alliances, and even his funding from the papal treasury. It was like watching someone step into their dead brother's shoes without missing a beat. The transformation was so smooth, so perfectly orchestrated, that even the most naive observers in Rome started asking uncomfortable questions. But here's where it gets absolutely insane. Pope Alexander VI not only allowed this transition, he actively facilitated it. The same man who had wept publicly over his murdered son was now channeling all of Giovanni's resources directly to the person who most benefited from his death. Think about that for a second. A father essentially rewarding his son's murderer with everything the victim had worked for. The official investigation? It quietly disappeared. No arrests were made. No justice was served. The most powerful man in Europe simply decided that finding his son's killer wasn't worth pursuing anymore. And the only person who gained anything from Giovanni's death was suddenly the most powerful Borgia in Italy. This makes the Lannister family dynamics look like a healthy support group. At least when Tyrion was accused of murdering Joffrey, there was a trial. When Jaime pushed Bran out a window, he at least felt guilty about it. But Cesare, he murdered his brother and then convinced their father to give him everything Giovanni had owned as a reward. What's absolutely chilling is how Cesare used Giovanni's death as a stepping stone to becoming one of the most feared men in Renaissance Europe. He went on to conquer territories across Italy, inspire Machiavelli's The Prince, and create a reign of terror that lasted for years, all built on his brother's blood. The witnesses who might have testified, they started dying in mysterious accidents. The fisherman who found the body, he disappeared entirely. Anyone who asked too many questions about that night in June found themselves facing very dangerous circumstances. And through it all, Cesare never showed a moment of remorse, never grieved publicly, never even pretended to miss the brother he had grown up with, shared meals with, and ultimately murdered in cold blood. You want to know what real evil looks like? It's not someone who kills in rage or passion. It's someone who can plan their own brother's death, execute it perfectly, and then build an empire on the foundation of that betrayal. But if you thought fraternal murder was the worst family betrayal in history, wait until you meet a father whose rage was so legendary that they named him the Terrible. Now let me introduce you to a man so violent, so completely consumed by paranoid fury, that his own people gave him a nickname that translates to Ivan the Terrible. And trust me, in 16th century Russia, you had to be absolutely horrific to earn that kind of reputation. Ivan IV wasn't terrible because he was a bad ruler. He was actually quite effective at expanding Russian territory and consolidating power. He was terrible because he was genuinely consumed with rage and suspicion, convinced that everyone around him was plotting his destruction, including his own family. Picture this. You're the absolute ruler of the largest country on earth. You have unlimited power, vast armies, and the ability to execute anyone who even looks at you wrong. But instead of feeling secure, you're convinced that your wife was poisoned. Your advisors are traitors, and your own son is planning to overthrow you. This is the mental state Ivan lived in every single day for decades. And when you combine that level of paranoia with unlimited power and zero impulse control, you get a recipe for the kind of family destruction that makes Tywin Lannister's treatment of Tyrion look gentle. Ivan's son, Ivan Ivanovich, was everything a crown prince should be. Intelligent, politically savvy, beloved by the people, and completely loyal to his father. But in Ivan the Terrible's twisted mind, these qualities weren't virtues. They were threats. Why would people love his son so much unless they were planning to replace him? The breaking point came in November 1581, and it started with something so mundane, it's almost absurd. Ivan Ivanovich's pregnant wife was wearing clothing that the Tsar considered inappropriate. When Ivan the Terrible confronted her about it, his son defended his wife like any loving husband would. Can you imagine that conversation? Father, please don't yell at my pregnant wife about her dress. In any normal family, this would be a minor disagreement solved with a brief discussion. But Ivan the Terrible wasn't capable of normal human interaction anymore. What happened next was the kind of explosive rage that destroys dynasties in a single moment. Ivan the Terrible saw his son's defense of his wife as proof of everything he'd been paranoid about. Here was his heir, publicly contradicting him, choosing his wife over his father, showing exactly the kind of independence that Ivan's diseased mind interpreted as betrayal. Guys, if you're loving this journey through real betrayals that make Game of Thrones look innocent, please subscribe to the channel, because what I'm about to tell you next is going to blow your mind. Because this argument between father and son escalated into something so shocking that it literally ended the Rurik dynasty that had ruled Russia for over 700 years. We're talking about a moment of rage so complete, so devastating, that it changed the course of European history forever. And unlike the fictional violence in Westeros, this really happened to real people in a real palace, with real consequences that lasted for centuries. So what exactly did Ivan the Terrible do when his son dared to defend his pregnant wife? Ivan the Terrible grabbed his iron-pointed staff, the same ceremonial weapon he used to intimidate borgias and foreign diplomats, and in a moment of pure, uncontrolled rage, he struck his son directly in the head. The sound of the iron staff connecting echoed through the palace halls. Ivan Ivanovich, the crown prince of Russia, the heir to the largest empire on earth, collapsed to the floor with fatal injuries, blood pooling around his father's feet. And in that single moment of murderous fury, Ivan the Terrible didn't just kill his son, he destroyed his entire dynasty. Here's what makes this so much more devastating than anything in Game of Thrones. This wasn't a calculated political move like Tywin ordering the Red Wedding. This wasn't strategic like Cersei eliminating threats to her power. This was a father so consumed with paranoid rage that he fatally wounded his own child over a dress code argument. The immediate aftermath is absolutely heartbreaking. Historical accounts describe Ivan the Terrible falling to his knees beside his dying son, cradling the head he had just injured, screaming for doctors, begging God to undo what he had done. For 3 days, he refused to leave his son's bedside as Ivan Ivanovich slowly died from his wounds. Can you imagine the agony? Watching your own child die from injuries you inflicted in a moment of uncontrolled anger? Knowing that your paranoia and rage had just cost you everything you'd spent your life building. But here's where it gets even worse. Ivan Ivanovich's wife lost her pregnancy from the trauma of watching her husband fatally wounded by his own father. So with one swing of that iron staff, Ivan the Terrible killed both his son and his unborn grandchild. The direct line of succession was completely destroyed. The political consequences were catastrophic. Ivan the Terrible had another son, Fyodor, but he was mentally disabled and completely unfit to rule an empire. When Ivan the Terrible finally died in 1584, Russia entered what historians call the Time of Troubles. Decades of civil war, foreign invasion, and political chaos that nearly destroyed the country. Think about that level of family destruction. Tywin Lannister was ruthless, but he never accidentally wiped out his own bloodline in a fit of rage. Even Cersei, for all her cruelty, was trying to protect her children. But Ivan the Terrible's paranoia was so complete that he saw enemies even in his son's love for his pregnant wife. What's absolutely chilling is that Ivan the Terrible lived with this guilt for the remaining 3 years of his life. Court records show that he would randomly break into tears, cry out his son's name, and beg forgiveness from God for what he had done. He commissioned paintings of his son, wrote letters to monasteries asking for prayers, and spent massive amounts of treasury money on religious ceremonies hoping to save his son's soul. But the damage was irreversible. The Rurik dynasty that had ruled Russia since 862 AD ended because a father couldn't control his temper during a family argument. And if you think patricide is the ultimate family betrayal, wait until you meet an emperor who proved that matricide can be even more twisted. Now let me tell you about a betrayal so twisted that it makes everything we've covered look like family therapy. Because at least Cesare and Ivan were fighting with brothers and sons who could theoretically fight back. But what I'm about to tell you involves a mother whose only crime was loving her son too much and making him the most powerful man on earth. Agrippina the Younger was basically the ultimate stage mom from hell, but with access to imperial poison and political assassinations. She had one dream: to see her son Nero become Emperor of Rome. And she was willing to murder anyone who stood in their way. Here's how completely devoted this woman was to her son's success. She married her own uncle, Emperor Claudius, specifically to position Nero as heir to the throne. She then systematically eliminated Claudius's biological son Britannicus through a campaign of political maneuvering and probable poisoning. When Claudius himself started having second thoughts about the succession, Agrippina allegedly fed him poisoned mushrooms at a family dinner. Think about that level of maternal dedication. This woman committed multiple murders, including killing her own husband, just to make sure her teenage son became emperor. She literally built Nero's path to power on a foundation of corpses. And it worked perfectly. In 54 AD, 16-year-old Nero became Emperor of Rome, and Agrippina expected to rule through him as his trusted advisor and mother. She had sacrificed everything for this moment: her reputation, her relationships, probably her soul, and now she wanted to enjoy the fruits of her labor. But here's what Agrippina didn't understand about power. Once you give it to someone, you can't control how they use it. And Nero, despite being her beloved son, was about to prove that gratitude has a very short shelf life when unlimited power is involved. The problems started almost immediately. Agrippina expected to attend all government meetings, to be consulted on major decisions, to essentially co-rule the empire she had murdered her way into creating. But Nero wanted to party, sleep with whoever he wanted, and make decisions without his mother's constant interference. Can you imagine the family dinners? Nero, honey, I killed 3 people to put you on that throne, so maybe listen to my advice about foreign policy. Mom, I'm the emperor now. I don't need you micromanaging my life. The tension escalated when Nero fell in love with a freed slave named Acte. Agrippina was horrified, not because of love, but because this relationship threatened her influence over her son. She had worked too hard to let some former slave girl steal her position as the most important woman in Nero's life. So Agrippina made the fatal mistake that so many controlling parents make. She threatened to withdraw her support unless Nero obeyed her wishes. She actually told the emperor of Rome that she could take away his power just as easily as she had given it to him. Nero's response was to start planning his mother's murder. Because apparently, the lesson he had learned from watching his mother eliminate obstacles was that family loyalty only lasts until it becomes inconvenient. And the method he chose for eliminating the woman who had sacrificed everything for his success was so elaborate, so cruel, so designed to maximize her terror, that it still shocks historians today. Nero's first attempt to murder his mother was so elaborate, it sounds like something out of a Bond movie. Except this was real life, and the target was the woman who had literally created his empire. He invited Agrippina to a festival at Baiae, acting like the loving son she remembered. They had dinner together, laughed, shared wine, and Agrippina probably thought she was getting her boy back. When it was time for her to return home, Nero offered her his personal boat for the journey across the bay. What Agrippina didn't know was that this boat had been specially designed to collapse and sink in deep water. Nero had engineers create a mechanism that would cause the ceiling to cave in and the hull to break apart, making her death look like a tragic accident. The plan was flawless. Except for one small problem. Agrippina was tougher than her son anticipated. When the boat started collapsing, Agrippina's servant was crushed to death instantly. But Agrippina herself managed to swim to shore in the dark, cold waters of the Mediterranean. Can you imagine the terror and betrayal she felt in that moment? Realizing that her own son, the boy she had murdered for, the emperor she had created, was trying to kill her. When word reached Nero that his mother had survived the accident, he went into complete panic mode. Because now Agrippina knew the truth, and a woman who had successfully assassinated an emperor before was definitely capable of taking down her ungrateful son. So Nero abandoned all pretense and sent soldiers to finish the job. The historical accounts of Agrippina's final moments are absolutely heartbreaking. When the soldiers arrived at her villa, she knew exactly why they were there. According to Tacitus, she pointed to her womb and said, "Strike here," referring to the place where she had carried the son who was now ordering her execution. They killed her with weapons while she was still pointing to her stomach, still thinking about the child she had loved so completely that she had destroyed her own humanity for his success. And Nero's reaction when he received confirmation that his mother was finally dead? He reportedly celebrated. No grief, no remorse, no moment of acknowledging that he had just murdered the person who had sacrificed everything for him. Just relief that the obstacle to his absolute freedom had been eliminated. This makes Joffrey Baratheon look like a troubled child having a tantrum. At least Joffrey's cruelty was random and impulsive, but Nero's matricide was calculated, elaborate, and directed at the person who loved him most in the world. He literally looked at his mother's devotion and saw it as something that needed to be destroyed. What's even more disturbing is that this murder wasn't the end of Nero's family betrayals. Because once you cross the line of killing your own mother, apparently every other relationship becomes expendable. And the empire that Agrippina had built through blood and manipulation Nero was about to turn it into his personal playground of violence, excess, and destruction in ways that would make even Caligula blush. Once Nero had proven he could murder his own mother without consequences, he basically turned the Roman Empire into his personal torture chamber. Because that's what happens when you give unlimited power to someone who has already demonstrated they have zero capacity for human empathy or family loyalty. His wife, Claudia Octavia, was next. She had been a faithful empress, politically useful, and completely devoted to their marriage. But Nero had fallen in love with Poppaea Sabina, a married woman who demanded that he divorce Octavia and marry her instead. When Octavia refused to quietly disappear into exile, Nero had her executed on charges of adultery that everyone knew were completely fabricated. Think about the psychological progression here. First, he kills his mother for trying to influence his decisions. Then he kills his wife for refusing to step aside for his mistress. Each murder made the next one easier, until human life meant absolutely nothing to him. But it gets worse. Seneca, his childhood tutor and trusted advisor, the man who had shaped his education and guided his early reign, was ordered to commit suicide when Nero decided his advice was inconvenient. Seneca had literally raised this boy, taught him philosophy, ethics, and statecraft, and Nero repaid that devotion by forcing him to end his own life in a bathtub. Then there was Burrus, his military commander and another father figure who had helped secure Nero's power. When Burrus started questioning some of Nero's more extreme decisions, he mysteriously died of throat problems that historians believe was poisoning ordered by the emperor he had served loyally. The pattern was absolutely chilling. Anyone who had helped Nero become emperor eventually became a target once they were no longer useful or started questioning his behavior. It's like watching someone systematically destroy every relationship that had ever meant anything to them. And then came the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. While historians debate whether Nero actually started the fire himself, what's undisputed is his reaction to it. Instead of coordinating relief efforts or helping rebuild the city, he used the destruction as an excuse to build an enormous golden palace complex called the Domus Aurea, literally taking advantage of his people's suffering to create a monument to his own ego. The legend that he fiddled while Rome burned might not be literally accurate, but it captures the essential truth about who Nero had become. A man so completely disconnected from human suffering that he could see mass destruction and think only about how it benefited him personally. By this point, Nero had murdered his mother, his wife, his mentors, his advisors, and countless other people whose only crime was being in his way. He had turned the Roman Empire into a machine for feeding his appetites and eliminating anyone who dared question his decisions. This is what real evil looks like when it has unlimited resources and zero accountability. Not the theatrical cruelty of fictional villains, but the systematic destruction of every human bond in service of pure selfishness. But here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about these three cases of family betrayal. They're not even close to being the most shocking things that real historical figures did to their own relatives. Here's what absolutely destroys me about these three cases. George R.R. Martin, one of the most creative and twisted writers alive, had to actually tone down the violence and betrayal in Game of Thrones because real history was too shocking for audiences to believe. Let's do the math on family betrayals, fiction versus reality. Cesare Borgia versus the Lannister brothers. Jaime pushed Bran out a window to protect his secret, which is horrible but understandable from his perspective. Tyrion was accused of murdering Joffrey but was actually innocent. But Cesare? He murdered Giovanni in cold blood out of pure jealousy, then convinced their Pope father to reward him with everything his dead brother had owned. That's not protective instinct or false accusation. That's calculated fratricide for personal gain. Ivan the Terrible versus Tywin Lannister. Tywin was ruthless and manipulative, but everything he did was designed to strengthen his family's position. Even when he was cruel to Tyrion, he was trying to control him, not eliminate him. But Ivan literally struck down his own heir over a dress code argument, destroying 700 years of dynastic succession in a moment of uncontrolled rage. Tywin would never destroy his own legacy. That's exactly what he spent his entire life trying to protect. Nero versus Joffrey Baratheon. This comparison is absolutely laughable. Joffrey was a sadistic teenager who ordered executions and tortured people for fun. But Joffrey never killed Cersei, the mother who had literally murdered for his success. He never eliminated Tyrion, his uncle and advisor. He never systematically destroyed every relationship that had helped him gain power. Joffrey was chaotic evil. Nero was strategic evil with unlimited resources and decades to perfect his cruelty. But here's the part that makes reality so much more disturbing than fiction. George R.R. Martin had to invent consequences for his villains because audiences demand justice. Joffrey gets poisoned. Tywin gets murdered by his own son. Cersei dies in a collapsing castle. There's narrative satisfaction, poetic justice, the sense that evil eventually gets punished. In real history, Cesare lived comfortably for years after murdering his brother, only dying in unrelated military action. Ivan the Terrible ruled for 3 more years after killing his son, dying peacefully in his bed. Nero enjoyed absolute power for 14 years after murdering his mother, and only died when the Senate finally organized a successful rebellion. Reality doesn't provide narrative satisfaction. Evil people with unlimited power often live long, successful lives, while their victims stay dead forever. And here's what makes these stories even more credible than fiction. We have the receipts. Papal records of Cesare's sudden career change after Giovanni's murder, court documents describing Ivan's breakdown after killing his son, Tacitus's eyewitness account of Agrippina's final words. These aren't legends or myths. These are documented facts with multiple sources, physical evidence, and contemporary accounts. Fiction has to make sense and follow narrative rules. Reality just has to be true, no matter how incomprehensibly evil it gets. So when people say truth is stranger than fiction, they're not just talking about weird coincidences. They're talking about the fact that real human beings, when given unlimited power, can become more monstrous than any villain a writer would dare to create. So here we are at the end of this journey, through the darkest corners of real human behavior. And I have to ask you, which of these 3 betrayals shocked you the most? The brother who murdered his sibling for political advancement? The father whose rage destroyed centuries of dynastic rule? Or the son who repaid his mother's murderous devotion by orchestrating her death? Because what we've discovered today isn't just ancient history, it's a masterclass in how unlimited power corrupts absolutely every human relationship, even the ones that should be most sacred. These 3 cases prove that when people have no accountability and unlimited resources, family loyalty becomes the first casualty. Think about the progression we've witnessed. Cesare showed us that ambition can make you see your own brother as an obstacle to be eliminated. Ivan demonstrated that paranoia can turn a father's love into murderous rage against his own heir. And Nero proved that once you start viewing people as disposable, even the woman who sacrificed everything for your success becomes just another problem to solve through violence. What's absolutely terrifying is that these weren't isolated incidents by uniquely evil individuals. These were the logical outcomes of systems that gave human beings unlimited power without any checks, balances, or consequences. Remove accountability from the equation, and apparently this is what we're capable of. And here's why these stories matter in 2026. We're living in an era where power is more concentrated than ever before. Tech billionaires, political leaders, corporate executives, people with resources and influence that would make Renaissance popes jealous. The specific methods might be different, but the fundamental dynamics of unchecked power remain exactly the same. How many modern families have been destroyed by business rivalries? How many children of powerful people have been sacrificed on the altar of their parents' ambitions? How many mentors and advisors have been discarded the moment they became inconvenient to the people they helped create? The names and technologies change, but human nature remains disturbingly consistent when power and family intersect without moral boundaries. So which of these palace betrayals shocked you the most? Comment below because I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious which case hit you hardest: the calculated fratricide, the rage-fueled filicide, or the ungrateful matricide. And if you want more stories about how real history makes fiction look innocent, please subscribe to the channel and hit the bell, because next week I'm bringing you something that will make these three look like family counseling sessions. I'm talking about royal torture methods that were so creative, so systematically cruel, that they inspired modern horror writers. We're going to explore how real historical figures turned human suffering into an art form, and why the dungeons of actual castles make the torture chambers of fictional villains look like gentle therapy sessions. Because as we've learned today, the most terrifying monsters in human history weren't fictional characters dreamed up by twisted writers. They were real people with real power who discovered just how far human beings can fall when nobody has the authority to stop them. Reality doesn't need special effects to be absolutely horrifying.